All right, I got some more viewer questions here I'm going to try and get through, and I really appreciate you guys asking me questions because a lot of times I learn as much as anyone else that might be watching when I try to answer these. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below this video, and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, the first question I'll do here is from Martin, and this is from one of my best settings or something for birds in flight. But he asked me, help me understand why you shoot in shutter priority mode as opposed to manual. With the dials, you can control both shutter and aperture and then change the exposure compensation with a button. Perhaps you want faster control of your exposure compensation? But how do you control your aperture? All right, so Martin has been shooting this way a long time, right? He shoots in full manual mode where you have control of the shutter speed and aperture on the front and rear dials. And then if you want to dial in exposure compensation, you just push the button here and rotate the rear dial. And that's certainly a great way to shoot really almost any kind of photography if you're comfortable with the manual controls. Now that said, the reason I shoot in shutter priority mode when I'm doing my birds in flight is for one of the reasons you mentioned. I do like quick access to my exposure compensation. So when I'm in shutter priority mode, my front dial is exposure comp and my rear dial is shutter speed. So when I'm switching, say, following a bird in flight, in the sky, and there's a very strong backlighting, I can quickly dial in exposure compensation and then adjust my shutter speed to say 1/4000th of a second. And then say the bird lands on a stick in a tree somewhere and there's no more backlighting, I can dial the exposure comp back quickly and knock my shutter speed back down to say 1/2000th or 1/1000th of a second. And then the second part of your question was, how do I change my aperture? And really that's more of a layered answer because aperture controls your depth of field, it controls the amount of light coming into the lens, and to some extent also controls the sharpness of your images because usually when you stop the lens down 1 or 2 stops, you optimize the sharpness of the lens. For me, my priority is really on getting the maximum amount of light into the lens by keeping the aperture wide open. And when I'm shooting at shutter speeds of say 1/2000th, 1/4000th of a second, the aperture is wide open anyway all the time. So if I'm shooting with my 75-300, I'll be at like wide open at f6.7, at the 300mm zoom length. And then on my 300mm f4, it's always going to be wide open at f4. So I don't need to control the aperture. It's already pretty much defaulting to what I want it to be anyway. And I'm not really worried about depth of field either because, birds are usually pretty far away. So there's plenty of depth of field there that I don't have to stop the lens down at all to capture, to get more things in focus. And then finally, the other part of aperture is, optimizing the sharpness of your lens, because I know for a fact that if I stop my 300 f4 down to f5.6, and if I stop my 75-300 down to say f8 or actually f9 on my copy, I found to be the sharpest point for that lens. Any gains I get in sharpness is going to be completely lost because the ISO is going to go up. So for every stop that you raise the aperture on your lens, you are doubling your ISO. So if I raise it by 1 stop, let's say I'm at ISO 3200, going up 1 stop, I'm now at ISO 6400. And if I go up 2 stops, I'm at ISO 12800. So you can see that the slight gains I might get in sharpness by raising the aperture or stopping the lens down is completely lost because of the higher ISO. Now there's certainly a case to be made for shooting in full manual mode where you're controlling the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. In which case, if you need exposure comp, you would just increase your shutter speed to get negative exposure comp or maybe raise your ISO to get positive exposure compensation. But that's a little bit more than my brain can really juggle all at once. So that's my rationale for shooting in shutter priority mode in auto ISO. And it's just what works for me and my workflow. It doesn't have to be anybody else's. Ultimately just shoot what works best for you to get the shot that you want. All right, the next question here is from Joseph McGrath, and this is related to the OM1 and using the autofocus subject detect for birds. And he says, I'm amazed that the white square and then the I square appear over the bird no matter where it is in the viewfinder. But then another bird appears and the subject square jumps around. What can I do to set to make the subject detect more sticky? All right, so I'm going to show you one setting in the camera that may or may not help. I'm just going to kind of explain the theory behind it. In practice, I didn't find that it really helped that much. And then I'm going to show you a technique that I use that helps me in those kinds of situations. All right, so let's go into the menu and go into the autofocus menu. And then on page 2, we have subject detect turned on with eye detection turned on. And then let's go to the next page 3. And we have this setting here, CAF sensitivity. And we can set this to +2 or as low as -2. And I'll explain the difference here in a minute. And then we also have center priority. And you can set this for the various autofocus target areas, cross point, mid, and large. And if you use all points, which I think you mentioned in your question, it's always going to be center priority and work its way out if you're using all points. But this is specifically for using different target area points, and I just have them all checked and turned on. So the idea behind CAF sensitivity is how quickly will the camera change focus when it has 2 or more things it can focus on. So say, for example, we have subject A and we have subject B here. How long or how sticky will it stay on A before it changes focus to subject B, right? See how long that took? Now, I'm just using the EM10 Mark II to record this, but that's the idea. On the EM10 Mark II, it's very, very slow from A to B. See? And then let's go back to A. And then go back to B. So you see that delay? So if we set the sensitivity to +2, it's going to very quickly change from A to B. And if we set it to -2, it's going to take longer, similar to what I just showed you here, to go from A to B. But don't get confused by the idea that autofocus is now going to be more sticky on subject A. Because the idea of CAF sensitivity before we had subject detect was when you have subject A moving behind another object, the camera's not going to change the focus plane as quickly. So there has to be some distance between subject A and subject B, meaning subject B needs to be a lot closer than subject A. In that case, that's when CAF sensitivity waits before it shifts or changes the focus plane. However, now that we have subject detect, or specifically bird detect, the camera is very good at following the bird, and if it loses focus momentarily when it goes behind a tree, and it'll pick it up very quickly again when it comes out the other side, and you really don't need to worry about it. However, your scenario is about when you have multiple birds in the scene. So let's see how CAF sensitivity might react in those situations. All right, right now I have CAF sensitivity set to +2, meaning it's going to change focus very quickly when it finds something else to focus on. All right, so we're currently focused on the eagle there, and let's say this stupid bird flies right in front. When we're in CAF +2, you can see how quickly it changes focus from A to B, and then it struggles a little bit to get back onto the original bird. Now let's see what CAF -2 does. All right, so we're focused on this eagle here, and this dumb bird flies in front. See how it didn't change focus off the eagle? Even though it detected the other bird, it's not changing focus to this other bird, right? It's not changing the focus plane. I have to hold it there, and then it finally goes. It takes about 1 second, it looks like. So let's go back and see how long that takes. See that delay? Whereas before, it was much, much faster. However, because CAF sensitivity is based on, changing the focal plane from A to B, what happens when the birds are basically on the same focal plane? You see, this is probably more of the kind of problem you're having than what I was showing you before, because it's kind of random. If these birds are kind of flying around each other, you don't know which one the autofocus is going to decide to focus on. So this is where I use another technique by using the function lever to change the focus target area from all points, like I recommended in my last video, to a smaller 5-point or single point, and try to keep that on the bird that I want the camera to focus on. All right, the function lever is set to position 1, as you can see there. And what we're going to do is hit the joystick here and just change this so that we're on all points. And just click OK there. And then we're going to move this to position 2 and hit the joystick, and I'm going to change this to just a 5-point like this, and then click OK there. So now when I flip to position 1, I'm in all points, and then when I flip to position 2, I'm in the 5-point. So now when another bird comes into the frame, I quickly change my function lever to position 2, so that I'm in this 5-point area. And long as any of this green area is touching the bird that you want to focus on, that's where the camera is going to focus. It's not going to focus on this. Now, if both birds somehow happen to be within the same focus point, you're going to run into the same area where you're going to get a white box on both. But if the other bird is out of the frame or out of this green focus area, it's only going to focus on the eagle here in this case. And that's what I do when I have multiple birds in the frame, is I flip that function lever, make the target area smaller, and try and keep that on the bird I want to have focus on. So I hope that helps just at least a little bit, because that's really all I know, and hopefully some more experienced bird photographers can maybe chime in if they know some additional techniques or settings that might be useful. That would be greatly appreciated. And for everyone watching, if you find these videos helpful, you can support my channel by buying me a coffee or making a donation. The links below, because they help me to continue making videos like this, and they are greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.